The term ambient music was not widely used until the late 1970s, but it's hardly true to say that that's the earliest that ambient style music was ever created. So, what came before it? This is chapter 2 of 20th Century Ambient by Dusty Henry, part of the 33 and a third genre series. My name is Phil. I make ambient music under the name Left the Chat, and I'm a former librarian. But once a librarian, always a librarian. So I'm going to run this book club. Welcome to Ambient Book Club. This is chapter 2. It's titled Before Ambient. Last week we talked about the overarching idea of what is ambient music. And we very shortly discovered the idea that it's music that is very tied to the environment. And through that thinking, could probably be traced back all the way to the Big Bang itself. If you haven't checked out that video, please go back and start there. But a lot happens between the Big Bang and where chapter 2 begins. Much of it could be retroactively called ambient music, but I think in this genre, you could stretch the definition to include just about everything. So you have to start somewhere, especially when you're writing a book that is only 120 pages. So, where do we start? Our author, Dusty Henry, chose to begin with Erik Satie, who he calls the classical upholsterer of furniture music. Erik Satie, whose name I have been pronouncing incorrectly for several years now since I first heard his name or saw his name written and assumed it was Satie, and then discovered yesterday that most people agree it is Satie. He was born in 1866 and lived until 1925. But he came up with this idea of furniture music. It has a French name. I'll put it right here. I'm not going to try to pronounce that since I failed to pronounce Satie correctly. This one looks even harder. Now, Erik Satie is famous for some piano music that we've all heard, that we all know. Yes, my kids have been falling asleep to this since they were each a day or two old. One is 3 now, the other is 3 months old. So we have a lot of Erik Satie and Debussy playing in our house frequently. But his lesser known contribution are a collection of pieces under this concept of furniture music. Now, as the story goes, Satie was sitting in a cafe where he was trying to have conversations, and there were live musicians at that time playing in this cafe. And he became annoyed that it was disruptive to the conversations, to the reason that they were going to this cafe. They were not there to see live music. And though he may have liked the live music in a different setting, he was there to have conversations. But silence didn't feel right either, so he came up with this concept that there should be music that is ignorable, something that's going on in the background, something that you can just have in the back of your mind while the primary reason for you sitting in a room is not hindered. Satie writes, I imagine it being melodic in nature. It would soften the noise of knives and forks without dominating them, without imposing itself. It would furnish those silences that sometimes hang heavy between diners It would save them from everyday banalities. At the same time, it would neutralize those street sounds which impinge on us indiscreetly. Now, in the modern world, we run into this type of background music all the time. Unfortunately, in my opinion, when I go to a restaurant, the music that's being pumped into that area does not seem very often to be particularly made for that setting. It's just whatever's popular on the radio. Whatever is a playlist, if you're in a cafe, then someone types into Spotify cafe music and you get what you get. But I love this concept that each room and each setting could have bespoke music intended to exist, chosen for its particular feeling. In the same way that we choose our wallpaper or we choose the plates and forks and knives and mugs for our kitchen, the same way that we choose our living room furniture, our couch needs to match our love seat and our ottoman. Why would you not want your sound to be just as expressive and just as fitting for the place in which you sit? And at the same time, Satie is pointing us to this idea that if you leave it blank, if there's no sound, you'll get the sound of cars driving by, or in the modern age, lawnmowers and the dreaded leaf blower that seems to haunt my dreams at night because it's so prevalent in our afternoon soundscape. So you have to cover that up with something chosen by you. So you're not just at the whim and mercy of the world's sounds that, as he says, impinge on us indiscreetly. But this leads us to our next concept, our next idea. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I'm not going to cover everything in these chapters, and there's plenty in these chapters, so you should definitely pick up a copy. The link is in the description below to see what you've missed if you're just watching these videos, because I'm just hitting the highlights. But we get to John Cage. Now, this is a composer widely known, born in 1912 and lived until 1992. And sometime in the 50s and 60s, he came up with this concept of letting the background noise be the piece itself. And the way that he did this is a piece that we've all heard of called 4 minutes and 33 seconds, in which he sits at a piano and plays nothing for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Silence as ambience. So the sounds from a nearby road, the sounds from an audience as they rustle in their seats or dig through their purse to grab a hard candy and it crinkles as they unwrap it. A cough here and there from the left and from the right. These become the piece itself. And 4 minutes and 33 seconds is interesting because it will never be the same twice. It is meant to be played live. It is meant to just let sound exist around you and to pay attention to what those sounds are. Even if your eyes have to be trained on someone supposedly playing the piece on a stage under a spotlight. Now, there's this video that I stumbled across on YouTube where he's playing in a city street outside this piece. There's no audio to this video. I wish there was, because the point is that it's not pure silence and nothing ever is. At least that's the point in my opinion. And I do wish I could hear the sounds of that cityscape and the people standing in a circle around him, probably laughing or whispering to each other, I wonder what's happening, or saying, why is everyone circled around this old man sitting at a piano doing nothing? Because I think that would be the point of it. That would be the piece in that moment. Now, Dusty Henry writes a quick note on Muzak and elevator music. And I think there is a parallel here. People who don't know a lot about ambient music and don't follow it as an art form, when they've heard stuff I've written or my friends have written, they feel that it's just reminiscent of something you'd hear in an elevator, or maybe when you're waiting on the telephone to talk to your insurance company and they put you on hold. And I can see that criticism. And it's not that they're not the same thing and not the same purpose, which is to cover up the awkward sounds of leaving a space uncovered by sounds that you've chosen. I think the difference is that in ambient music, we're making much more conceptual choices. And when people wrote elevator music for the purpose of the elevator, or when Satie wrote music for the purposes that he wrote down, one of which I think is funny, it's called, I guess it translates to music for lunch or a civil marriage, because those two things are probably closely related, made me laugh. But when we write ambient music nowadays, the concepts seem to be bigger, and the gear we use is certainly different. But I think it's the sweeping choices that we're making to serve newer, broader, bigger concepts. But I'll get into that more when we have our final episode on this book, and I delineate some ideas that came to me about how I like to think about modern ambient music. And of course, no conversation about ambient music would be complete without touching on how it came to fruition and to maturity at the same time as electronic gear, electronic instruments were being designed and perfected by guys like Don Buchla and Bob Moog, or is it Buchla and Moog? Y'all can argue about that in the comments if you want. But you had people taking advantage in new ways of this burgeoning technological evolution going on, where for the first time, electronic sounds were being heard, created. And the machinery to make them was so new. Most of the time in the 60s, it was giant machines that could only be owned by corporations because they were so expensive and impractical. You had people like Daphne Oram working for the BBC, making noises that you might see on Doctor Who. And no one had ever heard sounds like this. And it was atmospheric and it was weird. And it created new feelings that weren't just to serve melodic, classical tastes. Although we'll see that the synthesizer and instruments like it have been proven to create very beautiful and very melodic music. So we have people using this technology in the 1960s to create brand new sounds and use them as art, not just commerce. And certain names keep popping up in every literature that you'll read about ambient music or adjacent music like drone music. You'll hear about the San Francisco Tape Music Center. You'll hear about Morton Subotnick, Ramon Cinder, and Pauline Oliveros. You'll hear about the minimalists, including Steve Reich and Terry Riley. And we'll discuss the minimalists in a different book in the future, so I'm not going to go into much detail here, because I plan to go into great detail about that beloved genre in the future. We hear about Wendy Carlos, who made an album of Bach music on her Moog synthesizer called Switched on Bach. Which eventually won 3 Grammy Awards and solidified synthesizers as a legitimate instrument in the mainstream world. And you can and should search around on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you get your music and check out albums from all of these artists. And I will link some down below if you'd like a playlist of sorts. But I think my recommendation for this week, a bit of homework if you will, is to listen to the album Deep Listening by Pauline Oliveros. And the concept behind it. And we actually get one of our author's very enjoyable cartoons to display the concept of Pauline Oliveros' Deep Listening, which is essentially just shutting down your brain, meditating, if you will, on the sounds that you're experiencing. And you may realize that there are more sounds coming at you all the time than your brain is picking up on consciously. The cartoon says, "So much of the world's sounds were passing her by, and she wanted to change that." So spend a few minutes in silence in your room, the room that you're sitting in now, and try to listen as deeply as you can and pick up one sound that is nearby. Pick up one sound that you sense as far away. Pick up a sound that comes out of nowhere, as I can hear sirens behind me. So after you're done spending a few minutes deeply listening to your own surroundings, check out the album by Pauline Oliveros. She plays accordion. It's a beautiful, tranquil journey. And I think you'll enjoy it if you enjoy ambient music at all. And if you are here, then I would imagine that you do. And as Dusty Henry points out to close out chapter 2, There's far more innovators than listed here. But beyond just electronic music, these first 70 years of the 20th century set up a musical revolution. Now, if you're just interested in electronic music and you want to learn about Daphne Oram, Wendy Carlos, Pauline Oliveros, and a long list of other influential women in the space, I have a recommendation to watch Sisters with Transistors, which is a more recent documentary. If you do a search, you will find it. It's free to watch on various streaming services, and it's wonderful and worth your time. So that's chapter 2, Before Ambient. And of course, next week is when we get into ambient proper. The dawn of ambient, we'll be talking about 1978, Brian Eno, Ambient 1, Music for Airports, and everything that followed after that. And I would love to hear from you if you've learned about some of these artists for the first time. Please tell me your biggest takeaway. And if you're a longtime listener and this is all basic to you, let me know what we should be listening to. What did we miss? What names are out there that I haven't heard of yet? I want to learn as well. I think for me, my biggest takeaway is the idea of furniture music. This chapter sent me on a journey in my own music creation where I'm thinking not of music for cafes in general, not for music for living rooms in general, but what would my surroundings be like with bespoke music for each room in my house, each space that I spend a lot of time in? What is the music to match the wallpaper and the drapes and my couch and my mugs and my plates? So I've been writing songs that I would like to play in the background for my living room, for my kitchen, for my studio. And it's becoming a little album. So I found great inspiration from this chapter. And I found great inspiration from this book in general. So pick it up, join us. We'll be back next week. Chapter 3. We're finally getting to Brian Eno and the dawn of ambient. Thanks for joining me.